So, continuing on our series about the the functional aspects of the spiritual offices. Last time we talked about, like, as we've been going through these different messages, talking about different facets of spiritual offices and kind of like characteristics of them. And we started last time talking about mercy and the reality of that as being something that's kind of like the innate quality of shepherds that really like sets them apart. And again, like, it's not something that's specifically it's not something that they have a monopoly on. It's just something that's more natural for them. You know, any office, any person can show mercy, can carry the trait of mercy, the God-given gift of mercy. It's just that for shepherds, it just comes a little bit more naturally. The same is true when we talk about today discipleship and teachers. See, when we talked about teachers during the original Spiritual Offices series, we talked about the fact that teachers have this innate thing where they naturally have an inclination to take people under their wing. And it's not like, you know, shepherds or apostles where they're going to get like a group of people, or evangelists where they're going to gather a bunch of people around them. You know, they don't do that. What it is it's like one or two people. They're much more reserved, and they're much more focused on, you know, in a few individuals that they really invest a lot of time and energy into. It's actually one of the ways that you can tell that you're dealing with a teacher as opposed to one of the other offices. It's so like entwined with who they are. And, you know, it's the kind of thing where, like, a lot of people, they kind of, whenever we talk about teachers, they assume like pastors, where they're standing up in front of the church, and that can be true. Like, I've mentioned many times in the past about like going to Bridgetown, and, you know, John Mark Comer being like a great example of a teacher who's leading a church, and like he raises up a lot of the people under him that he's raised up have also been teachers as well. I wish I could remember the names. Unfortunately, I'm drawing a blank. I went there for so many years, and
names of other teachers then?
yeah, he had like a little group of them that he was like discipling and like raising up. However, I can still see the guy's face. I just can't remember the name. Anyway, the thing of it is that, and a lot of this can come across as being really like arcane in a way, talking about this kind of concept, because again, discipleship's just part of being a Christian. Like, you can't go to a church and not have them at some time talk about the concept of discipleship. It's part of the meat and bones of being a follower of Jesus, is that you're supposed to disciple people. It's just that it's not as easy for all of us. You know, a lot of the offices, when you break it down in this fashion, and again, this can be like something that a lot of people have a hard time with, because again, we're only talking about a small portion of a person's personality. Like, we talk about offices because it helps kind of like bring some clarity as to what we're talking about. But at the same time, you know, these aren't the totality of everybody's experience and everybody's personality, just a portion of their character. Something that God's kind of like implanted into each of us, in our DNA, if you will, or our psyche, or id, you know, whatever. But, you know, some offices find it much more daunting to like take on a person. Take, for example, prophets. A lot of prophets have a hard time being responsible for another person in that regard. And it's not like some prophets, they have that kind of like shepherd's gift. So they'll like take on people in the sense of like wanting to bring them along and like teach them stuff, but it's not the same thing. Like if God told them, "Hey, I want you to like take this person under your wing, teach them to be like me, be responsible for them," they'd cringe and they might run. Evangelists can have the same kind of reaction. Like they'll come in and save the day, but when it comes to the long game, they're not always so good at that. But teachers, the word responsibility like gets their nipples hard. I mean, sometimes I just say things to kill my wife.
Stop, you're hurting me.
This is a message for a church group. Anyway, but like the thing of it is that they thrive on that. They really do. They yearn for it. They hunger for it. It just comes naturally. They can't help themselves. You know, it's like this thing. They're confident in their knowledge and their understanding of things, which is not something that every office has. Even apostles, you know, even though they're like the natural kind of created leaders of the pack, they still have a hard time. A lot of them have a hard time believing in themselves. Whereas teachers, when we talked about teachers as the office of teacher, you know, I talked about how like one of the big things with them is that it can be a pitfall that they come across. They can fall into like relying on their knowledge and understanding entirely, and that was because of the fact that they recognize how much time and energy they actually spend learning what they're interested in. They don't talk to you about things that they don't know. And, you know, that's not to say that you won't occasionally run into ones that are very prideful or arrogant, and they're going to try to, like, extrapolate from what they know in order to try to compensate for the fact that they have no idea what they're talking about. But what that is to say is that when they're telling you about something, if they volunteer a piece of information, they're usually doing that because they know what they're talking about. They've studied it, they've torn into it as much as they can, they've just, like, grabbed onto that concept and dissected it to the best of their abilities. And as a result, they have an understanding and a knowledge that they're confident in. And, you know, they're not only are they confident in that, but they're confident enough to take other people and share that information with them, and even take them by the hand and lead them forward in developing something with that. Because, see, one of the things with, like, teachers as a whole is they're more like a, you know, when we talk about it from the biblical sense, this office, it's not always just like somebody who stands in front of a pulpit or a class. It's really more like a coach. Like they're gonna take you under the wing, they're gonna teach you how to do it as much as they can, help you function in it. Hi.
He's like, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So, that's our little bear. He needs to lose like 10 pounds.
What? He does not.
He's fat.
It's
Anyway,
the camera.
it's so not the camera. Our little boy done got thick. it's negatively affecting his health seriously. Anyway, But the thing about teachers and the thing about discipleship, see, we talk about teachers. I'm just trying to kind of introduce and kind of bring to fore the concept of why this is such a thing for them. Because, see, the concept of discipleship is effectively taking another person or a small group of people and helping lead them, helping train them, helping build them in their understanding of the gospel, in their understanding of God, in developing a relationship with Him. And see, the thing about it is like, teachers innately do this. Like, because in their core, they understand the need to kind of pull somebody aside and help them develop a structure and an understanding to train them to, for all intents and purposes, take another person by the hand and lead them through, help them navigate all the intricacies that come with life as a follower of Jesus. Because one of the things is that there's so much that we don't actually understand or appreciate. And discipling people involves leading them through that. I mean, when we talk about this, one thing that I was given to kind of like talk about as an example, but also directly relating to this, is that discipleship, when we're discipling people, we're helping lead them into deeper, stronger relationships with God. And that doesn't just mean getting rid of sin. See, we get really hung up on the idea of being good enough for God, or of not being bad. And like, one of the things with our church is that we're not, I don't know if this has ever really come across, I'm sure some have picked up on this, but it should be understood very clearly, is that we're actually really not as, we're not going to save you. I'm just going to put it that way. I am not going to save your soul. And I understand that very, very well. No matter who you are, Grant, Steph, Dusty, Jeremy, Josh, if you're looking for that, you're looking at the wrong dude. See, the thing of it is that our goal, our prerogative, as it were, is not to save you, but to point you in the direction of your Savior. And giving you the opportunity to make the decision of what you want to do with that. And we're going to do everything we can to associate you with God so that you can know Him and make the most informed decision that possible. And the truth is I don't really think that anybody ever really gets to say, I choose God or not, until they really get a chance to choose God or not. And that's not a very sensical statement, so I'll put it another way. I don't really think we get to not make that decision until we've had a chance to be face-to-face with Him. Or face-to-face with the reality of Him. And as a result of that, a lot of us, I know a lot of people who have said that they've rejected God, and they've never even come close to knowing Him. Not even remotely. And that's the thing about discipleship and why that's so important, is because it helps us get there. And see, every office has such an incredible capacity to disciple. Teachers are, they're really good at helping organize and structure people. And that's what they love to do. It's why when we talk about discipleship, we're talking about teachers. But in terms of discipling, everybody brings another portion. Whether we're talking about shepherds from last message, they can help develop compassion in people. They can help develop mercy. They can help disciple people in that facet. And that's just like a starter, okay? Like, a lot of shepherds that you'll see like discipling people will disciple people to be giving, to be gentle, to be loving, to take care of other people, because that's what they value, to help people grow. Apostles, we'll talk about, I don't know what our next message is about per se, but I know it's going to be one of the 3 following. It'll either be about apostles and their kind of superpower to construct community, to build. And their ability to really, in discipling people, they have so much that they bring to the table, but the biggest thing is helping people find a place and helping them be in that place. With prophets, their kind of superpower is intimacy, and helping other people find that intimacy, to find that kind of weird relationship with God that's unique and special and something all their own. Or evangelists, and developing that zeal, that uncomfortable, awkward zeal that will see them out on the street corner with a bullhorn, not caring that people are mocking them, because what they're interested in is getting the word out, trying to bring people in. The way that they'll go above and beyond to cast those nets and drag those fish in. We have so many different things that we can that in terms of discipleship that can help really flesh out the whole of being a follower of Jesus. And we all bring pieces of that. And we all have the capacity to really help others function in the pieces of that. And that's incredibly important. And see, the thing of it is that it's not just about this side of it where we look at it all in terms of sin. See, when we talk about God refining us, we presume to mean that He's simply removing sin from us. But sometimes there are parts of us that just are not us, even though they're good things. And that's even a portion of why we're talking about offices. The value of looking at the spiritual offices in general is because with those characteristics comes a comfort zone, comes a place where you kind of fit in the community and are able to function in what's natural for you. And that's not to say you should never challenge yourself, and that's certainly not to say you shouldn't learn the other things. Obviously, I literally just talked about how we round ourselves out by learning those other things. However, what it is to say is that sometimes we try to do too much, and that can be exhausting, that can be destructive, and sometimes we get trained in the wrong direction. I know a number of people who are trained to be something that they're really not. And that kind of false identity can actually be really destructive. Because the reality is that a lot of Christians exist in this state of kind of shame of not being good enough. And we look at ourselves by comparing ourselves to other people who are not us and are not like us. It would be the same thing as if Heather, since she's here, or you know what? Let's throw Dusty under the bus. Yeah.
Dusty!
Because Dusty probably won't watch this message. Yeah.
I'm gonna tell.
And if she does, I'll be looking forward to the text message. Yeah. But Dusty, everyone in group knows Dusty. She's super quiet. It's just, that's her nature, and that's fine. But a lot of times people like Dusty will look at somebody like a Todd White, for example. For those of you unfamiliar, Todd White is a very muscular, dreadlock-clad evangelist who goes out and prays for so many people all the time. I think one of my favorite things was watching him go to Korn concerts, grabbing the guitarist and the bassist, Head and Fieldy, and taking them around the concert to pray for people, to pray for healing for people.
Whoa. Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's Todd White.
That's awesome.
The thing of it is that a lot of Christians, we exist in these states of shame because we've got like a Dusty looking at a Todd White and saying, I'm not like him, which means I'm not a good enough Christian. When in reality, this is like comparing apples and pears.
Which fruit is better?
It's obviously pears. But the thing about it is that...
Point is lost, officially.
love pears! But no, it's like comparing apples and pears. Because even though a lot of things might be very similar between the two, they're very different in terms of when they're ripe, when they're ready, when they're best, that kind of thing. Even how they're flavored. It just doesn't, it's not really a comparison. Dusty's a prophet. She's made to be a prophet. She functions as a prophet. She does her best when she's able to just be a prophet, to just spend time alone with God, to receive things from Him, to offer that kind of insight and that depth of insight, and to help other people drift into a deeper revelation of the Holy Spirit based off of the random stuff that she comes up with, because God just throws stuff at her. Whether it's the random verses that she gave to Grant when he was like having to realize that God was like backing him on some stuff that he wasn't sure about, or the random words that she's given to Jeremy or myself or Heather or so many other people. That's where Dusty functions best, is when she gets to just be Dusty and just be a prophet and just do that whole thing. Even though it might be good for her to step out and move into and do those things, like get a little taste of evangelism, it's not going to be her best place. It's not going to be her most comfortable and natural state to be doing that. It's just the way it is. We're built differently. And that's not something to be shamed or ashamed of. That's something to be celebrating and to enjoy. And that's the thing about discipleship that can be so incredibly important, is because we're literally walking each other through these transformations, becoming more of who we are supposed to be, but also helping refine each other. And like I was saying, and to my point here about all of this, refinement doesn't always look like the removal of sins. Sometimes it looks like the removal of things that just don't belong. Earlier Heather and I were talking about poverty mindsets as an example. And there are other less severe ones. Like, you can argue, like, a poverty mindset is basically this kind of prevailing mentality that says that you'll always be poor, or functions like somebody that's poor. You can be like middle class, for example, and you can still have a poverty mindset. And I've done that personally. Like, there was a very brief period of time when I was a teenager, and my mom's barber shop took off really well. And we hit middle class for the first time ever in my life, and the only time ever in my life. It didn't last.
Did you go shopping?
We still went shopping at the places that we went shopping at. Like, nothing changed. We had been poor for so many years. It didn't matter. Like, we couldn't even like appreciate the fact that we had more money. I would still like live off nothing. Like, I would still work to save up money, doing odd jobs and random stuff, even though I could have just asked. And yeah, Like, that was the point. I really like you. Okay. No, you don't. I like you the best.
What?
Yeah. Anyway, so the thing is that, like, you know, a poverty mindset, though, what it comes with is a fear of not having enough. And the reality is that, like, a lot of people have that. And, I mean, a lot of Christians, especially when God starts saying things like, hey, I'm going to provide for you, they're just like, oh, so you're going to empower me to provide for myself. That's obviously what you meant, right? No, I mean, I'm going to, like, literally make it rain food for you. Oh, so you mean you're going to, like, provide me the money that I need to buy lots of food? No, that is not what I said. And, like, that's the thing, is, like, what it is that you can turn around and say that there is, like, a sin here in the fact that there's fear, or that, you know, they're not believing in God,
Faith.
or different things like that, or their complete lack of faith in God, which is a big thing. But the trouble with it is that one thing that we need to understand and appreciate is that there's a vast difference between a willful sin and a blind spot. And that's the thing here, is that, like, that poverty mindset, that's a blind spot. That person in question, when they're doing that thing, they're not saying that. You know, they're not doing those mental gymnastics with what God told them because they don't want to believe in God. No, they're doing that because they have no premise for that. That's like telling a blind man that you're going to show them something that glitters. They don't have the premise for that. They can't actually see that. The concept is completely foreign to that person. It's no more of a sin than anything is to be ignorant.
I'm gonna check out something.
Okay. And that's the problem, is that, like, one of the I lost my train of thought. I'm so glad that Edgefield's not the only place that this happens. Anyway, we're way too committed to shaming ourselves for what we don't know. And, like, one of the core things is that ignorance isn't a sin. So shaming ourselves for ignorance, or punishing ourselves for ignorance, is ridiculous. And oftentimes, like, we need that discipleship. We need somebody to literally take us by the hand and walk us through these things in order to help us see the realities of that. Because we're left to our own devices. Most of us are raised in shame culture. Like, shame culture is American culture, okay, just to be clear. I mean, my old I won't. I guess I'm not going to go there. Point is just that. Shame culture is American culture. And as a result, American Christians, which is everybody in this group, like, we have an impossibly hard time not turning around and just brutally punishing ourselves for things that we don't know. And that's where it's implicit on us to be able to have people who are going to come alongside of us and raise us up. And not only raise us up, but keep us even keel here. Because the truth is with discipleship is that and especially with teachers doing discipleship, is that they're building kind of a structure of things to focus on, to build on, to live in. They're, to go back to the old house analogy, they're the wall builders. These are the confines of your house. Don't go outside of that. But what about that? No, stop. You're not there yet. Or more often, that's not the place you need to be. That's not a place that's important for you. Let me take you through this. It's really invaluable for us to have teachers that will come along, or to be teachers who will come alongside people and help them, help build them, help lead them, help teach them, help them understand what's going on and why, and help them to be merciful to themselves. Because we need that. We're not merciful people. Like, it might come naturally for shepherds, some usually, but even a lot of them, like, can have a hard time with it. They'll feel it, but sometimes they'll, like, justify worse behaviors. And that's something for all of us to grow in. Are you coming back up?
Yeah.
Okay.
I smelled something burning.
That's weird.
It could have just been like somebody's having neighborhood things go on at 2 in the morning. I don't know.
I don't know about that either. Anyway. So yeah, with all of that, it's really important for us to be able to understand what refinement looks like and how that feels even. And even to take us through like the process of grieving, who we used to be. Because sometimes who you were, like, it's one thing when we look at sin. I remember sitting with this one guy. He and I used to run a men's group together. And he would actually like grieve his past of using drugs and alcohol. He talked about how much he missed it.
No way.
Yeah. Like, there was a lot of that stuff that he loved. He gave it up for God.
Yeah.
But he still liked it. And the reality is that like that's a thing. But talking about what we would call sin, that's one thing. But then we talk about other things that we grieve. I can think of I'll just put myself on blast here this time. I was talking to Heather earlier about the fact that like, I've had to go through processes of grieving my old self. When I was a teenager, I was a very aggressive man. Or teenager, early to mid 20s, I was a very, very aggressive man. And like, you can ask Jeremy about the wonders of living with that. He enjoyed it because he's a masochist.
I bet he did. Oh. Feel free to comment below.
Anyway, or at least he was. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He still is. It's the truth.
He still remembers.
But the thing is like, I was very hyper aggressive. And the reality is that like, I had a lot of things kind of like crumble on me. And as a result, the hurt of that caused some significant changes. I mean, I got my...
I smell it.
You smell something burning?
Yeah.
Okay.
What if it's the light?
I don't know.
It's fine.
We'll deal with it in a minute.
Yeah.
Anyway. I had a lot of things like go wrong and kind of like turn on me. So whether we're talking about getting my heart broken by somebody that, by my entire church, or getting kicked out of the army, like those were all like particularly traumatic experiences, and they all happened like one right after the other. And then if that wasn't enough, coming back from there and being stuck in the same church where I felt like a pariah, and then work getting particularly hard because my boss decided he was mad at me for joining the army, and then that becoming a big thing in and of itself. I was left in wobbly legs, and while I was there, people just kicked the hell out of me. And as a result, that diminished some of those things. I felt less confident in myself. And it's hard to be aggressive when you lack confidence. Actually, let me rephrase that. It's hard to be strongly aggressive when you lack confidence. Everybody knows what little man syndrome looks like. It's aggressive, but it's trying to compensate. I was not a man with little man syndrome.
Mr. Bear knows.
That's true. This little loaf of hair and adorableness knows. He has something to prove. Anyway, the thing is then it only got worse after becoming to work for the church. Oh my gosh, it was like the more aggressive you are, even though life might require confrontation many times over, especially in the church, man, you'll get punished for it. You will. And it's garbage, but it's what happens when people don't want to learn something new. So, in the face of all of those things, it was just this gradual thing where I felt myself moving more into a place of walking on eggshells. And I'm not completely past that. Like, even though I'm making strides, growing into places where God has called me to be, there's still a journey there, and I'm not there. I can say that honestly. So I look back at my old self, and that version of myself, that hyper-aggressive one, who was completely fearless, I grieve the fearlessness. I do not grieve the callousness or the cruelty.
Or what you did with your anger.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really have I'm gonna get angry type of thing. I would tend to get even more often. I mean, you can ask Jeremy about that one too. He suffered more than enough.
I'm starting to think you might have had something to do with it.
No, he did it to himself. But anyway, all that to say, we grieve our old selves a lot. Because for whatever reason, we oftentimes look at who we used to be and find value in who we used to be. And sometimes there are real things. Like I'm saying, my at one time being far more fearless than I am now, I grieve that. I do. Because there's a place for that in my life right now. There's a necessity for that in life right now. Unfortunately, it's not there. At least not as a whole.
Yeah. hasn't been like let out to like function
Yeah.
to like full capacity. Instead, it's a little bit like softer because you feel like you have to be careful
Right.
so that you don't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
And sometimes that takes away from what God is doing.
Yeah. So, and the reality is, with all that said, like we sometimes there are things that need to change. Like, do I need to be, in that instance, I did need to be less cruel. I did need to learn to be more sensitive to people, to be more compassionate, to be, confrontational, but in a different way. Like, did I need to be an absolute ass to people when I was confrontational? Because it would be more the kind of thing like, let's say, there's a problem. My way of handling it would would effectively be like, hey, here's the problem with you. You need to change because right now you're useless and you're pathetic.
And you're saying you've changed?
I wouldn't use those words. Like everything in me was just intended to like inspire that need to change, and it oftentimes involved, using a certain level of utter brutality.
Yeah, carelessness, basically.
Yeah, I would hurt people to get them to do what they needed to do, or to get their attention.
That people like deserved, bad things to a certain degree. At least that's what usually comes with somebody that like thinks justice is their job.
Yeah, I didn't really feel that it was about justice or about them getting what they deserved. Mm-hmm. It was more so in order to get them to move, to get their attention. It was like
get out of the way.
It was like using a cattle prod on cows. It stung, it hurt, but it made them move.
Yeah.
So that has no place in life as a Christian, in life as a follower of Jesus. So in that regard, that needed to change. And I don't really grieve that thing, but that's when I talk about like refinement and about how sometimes things that weren't necessarily sinful needed to change, that goes back to that point. And sometimes there are things that aren't even, like, I'm using examples that are pretty, like, blunt, but even some, like enabling, for example. Enabling is not sinful, per se, but it isn't necessarily helpful. And a lot of people who enable, they can have a lot of friendships and relationships and so on, because people know that they can hang out with you and know that and appreciate that you're not going to tell them what to do, and you might even help them do things that you both know that they shouldn't. But that's not actually something that's really involved in our faith. Jesus never enabled the disciples to do evil things or corrupt things. He met them with indignance. He met them with correction. I mean, it was a thing. And that's just as much a part of us as well. And it's just like, and there are so many I could go on and on and on about this, but it would kind of distract from the point in a way. Because the point is to kind of like highlight how the refinement process isn't as black and white as we make it. It's not about sin. It's not about good and evil. It's not about sin and righteousness. The refinement process is about becoming more who God has made you to be. And that can involve good characteristics having to be washed away because they're not your characteristics, or they're not beneficial characteristics to you.
Like independence in a marriage.
Yeah, independence in a marriage can be a very good example of that.
There's nothing sinful about being independent necessarily, but it's also, it's not invited
Right.
into a marriage.
Yeah. It's basically like, rather than being one land, you're just a pair of islands that are nearby each other.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, like, all those examples, they all come together and kind of form this thing of, like, why it can be so incredibly important why discipling is so incredibly important. Because there's a lot of heavy stuff here to look at and to be involved with. And it can be really hard to navigate that, especially when you don't have, like, a coach or somebody to help you kind of, like, deal with it. And that's why it's so important. That's why it's such a good thing. And yeah, there's a lot of other stuff I could say about discipleship. The truth is, we could probably spend an entire series dedicated to the concept of discipleship and everything that comes with it. But I'm just giving you what I've given for tonight. And for this specific message, and within the realm of talking about teachers and the importance of them. And their kind of superpower of discipleship, the way that they innately, naturally migrate towards developing the structure and the disciplines and the different facets of how we move through and navigate this kind of crooked road, as it were, heading towards, the summit of heaven. And how, in a lot of ways, not only do we need that to be something that's raised up, to be illuminated, but we need that, we need to also be able to, like, bring that to the fore, because it's a mess. Like, being a Christian is messy. Being a human being is messy enough. But when you start, like, bringing about things where you come together with Christ, and you are now a Christian, but that doesn't necessarily mean you know how to be. When you're born, you're a brother, and you have a sibling. If you're male, you have a brother. If you're female, you have a sister, or you're a sister. You don't actually, like, know what that is. You just are it.
Yeah.
And being a good brother or a good sister is something that has to be developed. Just like being a bad brother or a bad sister. It's something that has to be developed.
Exactly. It's hard.
And the one benefit, the one really great thing about being a follower of Jesus is that we're not alone in that. It's not like some of these other things where you just obtain an identity and you now have to kind of, like, figure it out. There is that facet of it. We all have to do some level of figuring it out, but we also have people who can come around us and, like, elevate us and lead us through it. And again, like, that's the superpower for teachers. Like, they just do it. They get it. And they can't, it's just part of what they do. They love it. They enjoy it. They get this weird kind of pleasure out of it. They love to invest and see growth. It's like planting seeds in the soil and then watching them grow. It's a funny thing because I just recently did that, and I saw my first little sprouts, and then a cat dug them up because it needed to pee somewhere.
There was nowhere else to pee.
There was everywhere else to pee. Everywhere else in that blasted garden. It didn't need to be my kale sprout. My one kale sprout. I'm hurting. I watched it happen.
So was the cat.
I held my dying kale sprout in my hands, woman. I tried to save her. Anyway,
It's hard to come back from that.
it is. You have no idea. Traumatized. Somebody's gonna Grant's gonna send me a picture of a kale plant, and I'm just gonna be triggered for days. This is what my Bella could have been. She could have been this. Anyway, so all that said, this is kind of a thing, it's a thing for us to do. It's a thing for us to be. It's a thing for us to learn from. And it's a thing for us to imbibe in. This life of discipleship and being discipled by others. It helps to have other people to talk to, especially people who can help us, help direct us. And that's the thing, is I said early on, the one great thing about teachers is how they're built. They can be, at their worst, they can be arrogant, pompous, self-righteous, prideful, and all of that tedious. At their best, they can be the best coaches and guides. They can just help break things down for you, help you understand it, help find ways for you to understand it. In their hunger and thirst for knowledge and for just creating an order out of the chaos that we exist in. It can be a really beautiful thing. And it's important to look for. And if you've got people around you if you're blessed to have a couple of teachers around you who are taking you under their wing, enjoy that. It won't always be perfect, of course, but it will be nice at times, and it will be very helpful at other times. And if you are a teacher, that's what you're gifted to do. That's your office. Do it.
You're important.
See your value and take on those disciples. And yeah, don't go into full shepherd mode and take in every stray in the world, to try to craft them into something. You'll just overwhelm yourself. But find your limit and do it, because we need it, especially right now, where people are at, finding what's true and what's not, finding kind of how to navigate this kind of chaos state that we're existing in. It's not easy. And it seems like a lot of emotions are at the forefront, and a lot of critical thinking is way off in the back burner of another restaurant. Harley agrees.
He's snoring.
Yeah. Anyway. So that's what I got.